From the News Channel 5 Network, this is OpenLine.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to OpenLine. I am Ben Hall. Good show tonight. We are talking about presidential politics. So much to discuss. Want to hear from you. What do you think? We are happy to have with us Vanderbilt professor Thomas Schwartz, professor of history, but political science. You love it. We talk about this. It's great to get a historical perspective on some of this stuff. There's stuff in the news today, but I want to open with the Republican Party. What's going on there? Donald Trump is the presumptive nominee, but the party's so divided. You have Paul Ryan and others saying, I don't know if I can support him. Big meeting tomorrow, I believe, with Paul Ryan. How unusual is it, historically speaking, for the main party, a major party, to be so divided?
It's unusual in the last 30 to 40 years. The last time we had as serious a divisions within political parties would be the two campaigns, George McGovern's in 1972, where he had a number of Democratic figures distancing themselves, including the head of the AFL-CIO, George Meany, the unions, not endorsing him in 1972. And then in 1964, Barry Goldwater on the Republican side found it hard to get more moderate Republicans to come on board his party, and there was a significant number of figures who were campaigning for him, against him among the Republicans.
And the two you mentioned, they both lost.
They both lost
by a lot.
Yeah. Yes.
So then Donald Trump has said the party does not need to be unified. He's not sure it needs to be unified.
Yes.
And there is no doubt he's bringing in some people that haven't voted before.
Yeah.
How true is that?
Well, my own suspicion is that he's wrong about that you still need a unified political party to carry out a campaign in modern conditions. On the other hand, he is gambling that he has an appeal across party lines that shakes up the traditional constituencies. For example, he's not as socially conservative, so might he attract more liberal figures on the left or in the Democratic Party that might have been turned off by the religious conservatism of the Republicans, that he also is not attacking entitlement programs, saying, for example, that they're going to stay. So he's a different type of Republican, and for that reason, will he be able to attract people? The other thing he's also gambling on is that Hillary Clinton's negatives are so high that he also might attract people on that grounds, that he might be able to play off suspicions about her, that she is the establishment candidate, and that the mood of the country is very much anti-establishment and looking toward some type of change.
No doubt her negatives are high, and that does make for a very interesting potential matchup. How do you explain the phenomenon that is Trump? And if you go back in history, is there a way to find a parallel? It's just so interesting to me that he's been written off over and over again. And even these big important people within the Republican Party say he doesn't have a prayer. Essentially, don't vote. Mitt Romney, don't vote for him.
Right.
And yet he wins by large margins. The people just keep pushing that button for him.
Right.
Historically speaking, what is the parallel?
There's not a good one. There is not a good one. There are some parallels with the figure who he does sometimes remind me of in a very different context is George Wallace, who became a popular figure in '68, particularly in the South, and was a figure more of a regional candidate. But then what people forget is that in 1972 he entered the Democratic primaries and actually won the Michigan primary based on a sort of backlash and anti-busing, anti-establishment type of campaign until he was shot. He was actually causing real disruption within the Democratic Party. So there are some parallels to that. There's some parallels to Ross Perot, who came out of nowhere in 1992 and was at one point second to George Bush. I mean, was really challenging. And Bill Clinton was actually trailing in '92 until Perot then acted rather bizarrely and withdrew from the race and then only came back in. So there are some parallels, but there's nothing quite like Donald Trump that's come up in recent times.
So what do you think it says about the mood of the country right now?
I think one of the things that was in the exit polls just now from West Virginia was the degree of frustration with the process. And I think in a politically polarized process in which President Obama stands against a Republican Congress and there's the perception that nothing gets done, there's really room for someone to say, look, I can do things, I can change. And Donald Trump's been in America's living rooms for 15 years as a star and a celebrity. He's got wide name recognition. He's been able to play on this sort of decisive, you're fired sort of vision of leadership. And I think in that sense, he's created a persona that fits the mood of the country. I don't know whether it has any real grounding in actual public policy, but it's a persona that many voters are attracted to.
And what do you think will happen with the Republican establishment, per se? Will they get behind him? Will they? I doubt there would be a third-party candidate, but would they do that? I mean, what do you think is going to happen?
Well, the third-party thing seems not to have gotten off the ground. There are a number of conservatives, William Kristol, the Weekly Standard, Senator Ben Sasse of Nebraska, others who've talked about it, but they haven't been able to find anyone to take up that cause, and so it doesn't look like that's going to move anywhere. I think the Republican establishment wants to get out of Trump some degree of reassurance that he is not going to say or do things that will cause damage to their down the ballot candidates in the Senate races and the House races. And that's the real concern they have, is they could lose the House and the Senate. More likely the Senate, but they could even lose the House if he is so toxic in his attitudes toward women, toward Hispanics, toward minorities, those sorts of things that would cause a reaction against Republicans down the ballot. But otherwise, I think they'd like to be able to say they'll support him because it would certainly help with the other candidates that are running.
As you analyze what we've seen in the voting so far, Trump does keep saying that he's bringing in new voters,
right,
millions of new voters. And I think it's true. You're seeing some people who are 50 years old voting who have never voted before. Mm-hmm. And that's very interesting. Is that enough to offset some of the concern of the Republican establishment that this could harm the Senate, their chance to keep the Senate and that kind of thing? How realistic is it that they could lose control of the Senate or the House?
I think it's very realistic they could lose the Senate. They've been worrying about the Senate for a long time. Many of the races, for example, are in places like Pennsylvania, which has normally gone Democratic in elections for the last 30 years almost. So they have a real danger of losing the Senate. The House should have been secure for them, and that is something that they, I think, are not as worried about. But if there were an election of landslide proportions, that could change. Similar in that sense to the 1980 election that swept in Ronald Reagan, in the sense that they lose the Senate. They lost the Senate that year. So they are, I think, reasonably worried about that type of implication from the Trump candidacy. What they need from Trump, what sorts of reassurances, what type of campaign he'll run, that's the sort of thing they're going to be trying to establish, that hoping that he won't be as impulsive and as subject to saying things off the cuff that might cause real problems for him.
What's so interesting is that seems to be what draws people to him.
That's right.
Because when you ask what is behind this phenomenon that is Trump, it seems to be that he kind of cuts through some of the traditional stuff that you hear in campaigns and people are just tired of.
That's right.
And I think people embrace the fact that over and over again he's written off, and they almost want to vote for him just to thumb their nose at whomever,
yeah,
whether it be the media, the establishment, whomever. And so there's that fascinating dynamic that I just haven't seen before. And I don't know where that leads. Do people get tired of it? I mean, have they made their statement, and then when they go to elect a president, they think, wait a minute, I don't know. Or does Trump change his tune to the extent that, I don't know, would that turn people off if he changed his tune, or would people be willing to embrace it? There's so many questions here.
That's right.
But what do you think? I mean, where do you think he goes in the general election? Does he maintain the persona that's gotten him here to this point, or is there some sea change?
Well, my own sense is that the act will get tiring to people by November. That there is a sort of sober element that comes in when choosing a president. The sort of, you might say, the equivalent of Lyndon Johnson's famous Daisy ad of showing an atomic bomb going off and then sort of suggesting that Barry Goldwater might do it. That would be the type of thing Hillary Clinton could suggest about Donald Trump, sort of encouraging people's fears that he might do something really crazy as president. So I do think, my own sense is that the act maybe get tiring and that people will vote more their sober calculation rather than a sort of middle finger to the establishment. On the other hand, I also feel like I predicted a Bush-Clinton race, so I really don't know what's going on, and so I don't want to take that chance necessarily to stand out online on that.
There's so many people who did. Now, and we're about to go to a break, but before we do, and then we're going to start taking calls, so if you're on the line, hold on. On the Democratic side, what does it mean that Clinton is struggling so much to put away Bernie Sanders? And is that a threat to unity on the Democratic side?
I don't think in the same sense, because I really don't think that, although there was some evidence that some Bernie Sanders supporters in West Virginia might actually vote for Trump, I can't see on the whole the type of youthful enthusiasm and the other things that have propelled Sanders actually switching as easily to Donald Trump. And my own sense is that it does show that Democrats wanted something fresh, that Hillary Clinton was seen as the establishment. But when the choice comes down to Hillary Clinton against Donald Trump, my guess is Bernie Sanders will be out there enthusiastically backing her in a way that you don't see the rivals of Donald Trump and the Republican Party enthusiastically backing him.
Bernie Sanders has said we must defeat Trump. He has made that point clear.
Absolutely.
All right, we're going to take a break, and then we're going to start taking calls. Kay, Phyllis, Maria, others. Hold on the line. If you want to call, there's the number, 615-737-PLUS, 615-737-7587. Take a break. Be back right after this.